Happy Friday, everybody. So I am not Hilary Weber. Hilary asked me to start off, and you can see from the slide above, she wanted me to start off by just kind of introducing myself, because as coaches we work together, and introducing myself and a little bit about some of the stuff from the home office. So some of you may not, occasionally you hear names or you see names on emails like Joelle Galbraith or Alan Young or like Heather Carter or Rob Stewart or some of these people from employment and scheduling. And you hear these names. And all these people, they all work up in Lamprecht Hall. Used to be some dorms, and now they all work there happily and joyfully together. I actually work from my house, and so I get to come up and see them in their element and stuff. And and to start off this presentation, we kind of wanted to know if you could get one message from the home office. What would those types of things be? So I want you to kind of think about that for just a little bit. And Hilary had me ask this question, and I think she set me up because lawyers always know that when you ask a question, you're supposed to know the answer before you ask it, right? So you don't get in trouble. And I have no idea what you guys are going to come up with. So go ahead and turn to your neighbor, look deep into their eyes, okay? And it's good that everybody's laughing because you can't do that without laughing. And so just talk for just 30 seconds or so, and then just start yelling out some ideas that you guys have of things that you guys would want to hear from the home office. And I will be writing those up. So take a quick 30 seconds and laugh at each other and stuff. Oh, okay. So even though I'm a little scared, I'm willing to ask the question. Kind of yell out some ideas of some of the things that you would like to get from in a personal message from the home office. Yeah. What's that? Thank you. On behalf of the home office, thank you. Okay. Jane. Praise. And not just, hey, good job, but something specific, right? So specific praise. I see you've been getting my my templated emails. Okay. Who else?
Getting a raise.
Okay, raise or show Scott the money, right? Okay. Yeah. I have absolutely no power. Yeah. Recognition for employees who have been here a while. That's my fifth year. Okay. So praise is specific, but also understand that some of you guys have been here for a long time. Okay, so longevity. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Okay, so you just want us to listen. Okay. Okay. So listening, have some empathy, right? Okay. No more of this. We want our weekly reflection. Oh, and by the way, we care. Okay, Danny in the back. Okay. Good. Okay. So some statistics. What are we doing? And maybe even statistics about your classes. That might be easier to get. Okay, so statistics. And then maybe some forecasting or a roadmap of where we might be going. But we could give that to you, but it would change like in 3 weeks.
That's another thing, Lynn, is changes that are coming up just to be a little forewarned about. Forewarned of changes.
Warned of changes. Okay, good.
Statistics on, like for example, in our pathway meeting, they talked about how many got certificates. Is anybody in the country doing follow-up to say
Okay, good.
local community college, or they,
Good.
because that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's another path, that's success. Can the missionaries or somebody local follow up and see what's going on?
Okay, so these are all fantastic ideas. I wish we could go longer, but I think Hilary's pretty anxious to get up here. But just knowing that we're having an impact, knowing that these students that we see maybe in their first or second semester, that they've actually gone on and things are happening for them. They've got their certificate, they've got their degree. Those are fantastic. So that's so think about what we just did, and Hilary's going to tie it all together here throughout her presentation. So now, the moment you've been waiting for, the person you came to see, Hilary Weber.
I love Lynn. I'm sure you guys, if you haven't met him yet, this is who he is all the time, even through email. You get an idea of who he is. I have had the opportunity to be an instructor coach for the last little while, which means I have been able to work with Lynn and learn from Lynn as well. So I today, that spurred on this presentation idea that I would like to share with you. The outlook I have with approaching coaching, and what it has taught me and how I have changed myself on how I approach my own class through this. So in looking at this, kind of want to bring you back a little bit to a green 1970s refrigerator. This is obviously my family, some of my family growing up. And my mother, we live in Dallas, Texas, or from Dallas, Texas, way far away from Utah, but we got the church news once a month. And there was this one picture in the church news that gave a quote. And my mother cut it out and put it on our fridge where it literally stayed for decades. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I saw it on the fridge. So this was around 1984 that she originally put it up there. And I wanted to laminate it to kind of preserve it and always have it. And it caught my attention. And this quote kind of came to my mind as I've been doing coaching. And this is literally the scan from the fridge of the quote, where you can kind of see how it's like yellow and stuff. It literally became this yellow thing, and it's from Carl Buhner. I don't know if I actually said his last name right, but he said, "They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And that, of course, was my mother's own way of trying to make sure that she did not make us feel a certain way in the home, because she was very cognizant of herself, the power that she had as a mother. I have 6 brothers, and they drove her nuts. And so she wanted to make sure this was more of a reminder for herself than anything else. And it has become one for me too. So maybe you're probably saying, why do we care about feelings when it comes to teaching? And this is something that I have come to learn of how this translates in the online world, because we do not get the opportunity to actually see our students. And so in looking at this and in coaching, when I start to coach with somebody, we meet the first time and we kind of set this sort of base foundation. This is my approach to my class that I then try to share with them. And then we kind of go from there. And really the way I go about figuring out how I'm going to communicate with my students, it comes from a 2011 research study report that I've talked about before. Some of this might not be new to many of you, but it's something that I repeat often. Repetition can be good in learning. And it's actually from the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. They did a survey for online and on-campus students. Very comprehensive. They wanted to figure out what to them is an effective teacher, or how do they perceive it as what is an effective teacher. So in doing this, what was interesting is that as they gave them this sort of list of like 10 things and different surveys for them to fill out and to do, they were surprised to see that the number one quality of an effective teacher was actually the same for on campus as it was online. And then, of course, the number 2, it diverged a little bit from there. The number 2 was different for on-campus online. So number 1, for those of you who maybe haven't heard me talk about this or don't know about this, what do you think, in looking at this list of 10, what would you say, online students would say, is a perception that a really effective teacher is this? What is the number 1? Approachable, okay. Engaged. Responsive. Okay, so those are all really good ones. What was interesting, again, thinking that this is the same number 1 for on campus as it is online. And it actually was respectful. So yeah, in learning, and especially you think about some of these universities, they would be like, oh, I want the knowledge, give me the meat. And really, when it comes to learning, no matter the medium that they were using, they wanted a teacher who was respectful. And we'll talk about what that really means, because that obviously can be relative term to different people. But then number 2, so the number 2 one for online, what do you think? So we're just really going to talk about the top 2. What is the number 2, would you say, as, so they want someone who's respectful, an instructor. Number 2. Knowledgeable, approachable. For me, I would have said knowledgeable. I didn't take courses online, so I was more on campus and stuff. And in reality, they wanted someone responsive. Number 2 for on campus was knowledgeable. Obviously, the responsive is a little bit different on campus because they get that face-to-face time and more immediate response. So in looking at that, this was very curious to me. I wanted to know, okay, how does this play out in reality? What does this really look like for online? How does this translate? And so in looking deeper into this, they then said, okay, well then what's the definition of respectful? And so of course, they had them look at a series of words and try to pick out, what does really this mean when you say you want someone who is respectful? And this is what they said: someone who is flexible, patient, helpful, open-minded, sincere, reasonable. But what was interesting is, most of all, they wanted this number 1 quality, and that was caring. So regardless of where they were getting the information, they wanted to feel like their teacher was caring. That made them effective. And to kind of, again, further define, well, what does caring look like? These were some of it, again, how the qualities, how they translate it, displays an interest in them, makes them feel comfortable, learns their names, offers to help. And especially yesterday, when we listened to President Gilbert and talking about a lot of these people, one of the number 1 things that keeps them away, right, is their confidence, not being able to feel like they can do it. And so a caring instructor, the number 1 quality, goes right along with that. All right, the second one, responsive. So their definition of what was responsive. And for them, it felt like it was somebody who they perceived to be available, efficient, helpful, perceptive, accommodating. Sometimes that word accommodating can, maybe to some of us, we've had experiences we're like, oh. But again, perception, right? We want to perceive. We can find ways to perceive that we're being accommodating without being accommodating, I guess. So responsive instructor, what does that mean in translation to our online classrooms? Give timely, thorough, and constructive feedback. And then the second part was give timely feedback on other communications. And so approaching this as an instructor, I found this to be very helpful. Then in trying to figure out how that translated in coaching, you get a variety of instructors from different classes and courses. It was interesting to see how this was the same parallel time after time on student surveys of these instructors. Some of the key words that they were using were directly found in the caring instructor and the responsive instructor. That literally was as simple as that and as textbook as that. So in looking at this, what I thought was very interesting was the correlation of the caring instructor and the responsive instructor to our online instructor standards. So without really even knowing about this study, if you strictly followed the online instructor standards, you would be doing exactly this very thing. And so just to kind of give you an idea of where you can find some even more elaborate information and detailed information, Lynn brought this to my attention because I did not even realize that this is where one could find it as well, is in the online community. To look at it in the student handbook, this is where in the community you would click. And when you get to the library, it's the instructor handbook is right here. And then you would have to go to section 9. Section 9 talks about the BYU-Idaho online instructor standards. What I thought was pretty neat was not only does it kind of tell you those 5 standards, but if you go down a little bit further where I have highlighted in yellow and you click on each of those, they actually give you like specific, detailed information examples. And I thought this was very instructive and helpful. I work much better with specific examples than kind of abstract ideas. And clearly our online students operate in the same way. So in looking at that, the 2 things it really correlates most with, the caring instructor, the responsive instructor, is the develop relationships with and among students, inspire a love for learning. And for each of those, a prompt and respectful emails, discussion board participation, prompt grading, substantive feedback, and of course critical thinking through your announcements or other areas in which you can try to offer critical thinking. And so again, even if you had no idea about the study or that students are looking for someone caring and responsive, if you could accurately and consistently rate yourselves at least a 4 and at least a 5 every week, you would be, in effect, giving your students an effective teacher. And so in talking about that with the online instructors, this is something how this correlates to what Lynn was talking about.
Hilary, good job. All right. So earlier we asked about if you could receive a message. Okay. And just so you know, I'm going to pull up my camera and take a picture of this because I respect those suggestions. I'm going to pass these on to other people and we'll see if they're responsive. Okay. We talked about things that you guys wanted to hear. So when you look at that from the student's perspective, you're kind of the home office for your students. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, in a minute I'll ask you for a couple ideas, but just kind of think about, the things that you guys talked about were great things and things that, you really want to hear those things. What do you think your students really, really want to hear from you? Go ahead and just jot down a couple of ideas. If you feel like it, go ahead and tell your neighbor. If you liked your neighbor. If you didn't like your neighbor, then just kind of ignore them and kind of look to the other side like this. Okay. Okay. Hopefully you've had some time to think about some things, and now that you've talked about those ideas, and maybe someday, I don't know, it's a crazy idea, ask your students if they want anything else. Sometimes it's good to ask students what they want to hear from you. Anyways, now that you've thought of some of those ideas, things that you think that they would want to hear from you, think about it like this. If you only had 1 hour to spend in your classroom, what would you do? And I know that's actually not a hypothetical for many of you. So for a lot of us, it's like we're busy. Maybe one night, between our 7 to 10 hours a week that we need to do in our classes, maybe there's one night when we really do only have like an hour or maybe even only 30 minutes. What are things that you would do first? So kind of just think about that. Now, for those things that you're going to do in that 1 hour of time, you want to be caring and responsive in that hour. There is I won't spend too much time on this, explaining this. There is a guy named Simon Sinek, and some of you have seen his TED Talk. It's one of the most popular TED Talks. And he talks about the what, the how, and the why. And I won't even try to explain it like he does because he's amazing. But I'll just give you a quick example that we probably are all familiar with. So here's some scriptures. When we go through and we read scriptures, that's the what. We're reading scriptures. And is there more than one way to read scriptures? Okay. So what would be an example of a good way to read scriptures? Just someone throw out some ideas. What's that? Okay, perfect. Read him, look at the scriptures, have kind of maybe a purpose when you're reading through the scriptures. Someone give me an example of a bad way to read the scriptures. Okay, the first Nephi, we all got that first line memorized, right? And I don't know if they still do this in seminary. When I was going through seminary a long time ago, they did the whole TAD thing, 10 minutes a day. And so sometimes I'd get there, okay, 10 minutes, okay, start. That's not 10 minutes yet. And then you just do it for 10 minutes because that was the checklist, right? You wanted to just get it off your checklist. And so reading the scriptures, the how we read scriptures can be done totally different ways. It can be done really effectively, where we get a lot out of it, or it can be done where it's just a thing on a checklist. It's better to check it than not at all, but how we approach it can make a big difference. And the thing that changes our how we approach reading the scriptures is our purpose. Kind of like how Tori just said, maybe you're singing a hymn and you see the scripture at the bottom and you feel inspired to go look at those. So if you have a specific purpose, or the why totally changes the how you're doing something, and ultimately how effective the what that you're doing. And so, if we do have a good why for what we're doing, for the reason behind we're doing things, then the what may be the same. Either way, I was reading scriptures, but the how I was doing it gave a totally different experience for me. And when you are working with your students, a lot of us, it's all the same. The what, it's all the same. We're posting things, we're grading things, we're responding to emails, we're responding to questions. The what is the same for all of us. The how we're approaching that can totally change the experience that our students are having. And that all comes from the why that we're doing things. So I would like, I had you guys think about a couple of ideas of things that you might do if you had 1 hour of time. And so you have you have a couple things for your what that's written. And go ahead and fill in those other two columns of the how and the why. So take a few minutes and whatever you've written for what you would do in that 1 hour of time, think about how you would do it and why you would do it. And as you reflect on that, when you get to that why, that can totally change your perspective. So we'll give you 1 or 2 minutes to go through that, and then I'll show an example of what I most often see in coaching, and I'll go through that. So go ahead and do that for just a minute or two. You can talk out loud if you want, because if it's too quiet, it feels weird. Okay, this is the part where Lynn rudely interrupts everybody. Let's have you guys throw out a couple of things on what you would do if you had an hour of time. So what are some things that you guys just came? Go ahead and just shout some ideas out. Check email. Okay, so check the discussion boards. I'll just write DB because then I don't have to write out the whole thing. It'd be messy anyways. Okay. Ooh, substantive feedback. Is this kind of like what a lot of you had for the things that you would do if you just had an hour? Did anybody have anything different, just for fun?
I actually like to check my grade book to know which friends.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. So a quick check of the grade book. Okay, so it's kind of funny that that those are the things that you all chose as like, if I only had a small amount of time, what would I do? Because when I am working with instructors who sometimes are struggling, those top three things, those are the things that a lot of times they're not getting to because they're so busy or they're just not sure how to do things. And a lot of times those are the things that we work on because those are the things that are going to reflect for being responsive and respectful the most right off the bat. So now let's kind of talk about how. So if you're in a hurry, okay, let's say you're in a hurry and you just don't have a lot of time. How might we check our email?
I look specifically for student emails because that's my priority. If I don't have a lot of time, as I'm looking, are there any student concerns coming in? That's why I'm there.
Okay, so as you're doing it, you're going to focus on students and ignore the home office. Okay. Now, I am not supposed to say this, but if you're focusing on your students, you're going to be fine in the end. I'm looking over to see, okay, Dave's not here, good, I might get in trouble. Seriously, though, if your focus is on the students, I mean, you can always get to that stuff later, but focusing on the students, so I would say that's a good thing. Now, so if that's the manner in which you're checking your email, that's how you're checking your email, you're focusing on your students, looking for them first. Why are you doing that? So, I'm sorry, what's your name? Haley? Haley. So what's the purpose? So what was your why for checking students rather than other stuff? Okay. Okay, good. Okay. So if your why is truly helping students, that's going to totally change the manner in which you approach checking email. And, for some of you, it might be, well, I'm going to check student stuff first. For some of you, it might be, oh, I'm checking this email. Oh, this student has this question. Oh, I hate that question. And the student's so annoying that I have to answer their questions every single week. I don't think I'm the one who's ever felt that way. Okay. If you have felt that way, you're checking, what you're doing, you're checking the email. You're doing the students first. But in that scenario that I just suggested, what would the why be there? It's required. Oh, I don't want to get low student evaluations at the end of the semester, so maybe that's my why. So I'm going to respond to it, but man, this is really frustrating responding to these like this. Okay? Do you see how if your why changes, it changes how you approach things? And even if the what's the same, and Hilary's going to hit this in just a minute, that changes everything. When your why is the correct why, or a good why, it changes everything thereafter. Okay? Let me see. And so I think Hilary has some good stuff, so we will jump ahead a little bit. So I was just going to show you, when we coach, a lot of times the biggest things that we run into is people who sometimes, that either because they haven't been trained, they don't even know how to do things. Sometimes we have people fall through the cracks, and and some of your TGLs have had this happen where people just don't know where to find stuff to do it. Okay, so a lot of times at first we're just helping them see, okay, this is a checklist. You need to do this, and at first, that's taking care of the what. And when our instructors when they start responding to their students, with, not 4 days later, but hopefully within the next 24 hours on their email when they check their junk folders. I had an instructor who was really frustrated because she said, I respond to all my students, but her student comment said, she never answers our questions. I send her emails and she just ignores me. And she was so frustrated because she was doing the best she could. And so I just said, well, if your students are saying you're not responding and you're saying you are, there's something wrong here. And so we just said, I asked her, I said, have you checked your junk folder? And she looked in there and she had I think it was over 200 emails from students over the past several semesters. And she felt horrible. Okay, that was an easy fix because she was willing. Once she saw that, she was good to go. And from then on, she did great. And then with the feedback stuff, for most students, if you're answering their questions quickly and you're giving them good feedback, they're happy. And those are the two things that I only had an hour, those are the two things that I would focus on with most people. Now, I do want to emphasize something, though. That happens, that's what helps a lot of people, but everybody's individual. And Hilary and I and James, we see this when we coach. Every person who comes to us, they're all unique individuals, and they all need something different. And, for a lot of instructors, if they only had a limited amount of time, they had to just pick a couple things, this might be really good things to focus on. But for your individual situation, maybe there's something different that you would focus on, and that's okay. Being individualized and focusing on different things and listening to the Spirit, that's key in what we do. I'll just skip here real quick. How you approach these things, I always tell people who are having trouble with tone is to imagine that you're not just typing on a keyboard, seeing these things, but that you're responding to someone who as if they were in front of you. Okay? If you imagine that, then it kind of changes the words that you use and how you respond to different questions. The other thing is, ask yourself, what I'm doing, could a computer just do the same thing? Okay? And if the answer is yes, a computer could just do exactly what I'm doing, then it's time to try to bring back the human element into things. I think it was Debbie's lightning talk. She had a thing about technology is going to progress and everything, but we still have to be human. And people who can do that, that's an important part of what we do. So if all your feedback is all template feedback, then a computer could do that. Now, it's okay to use template feedback. We all know situations where it's good to use template feedback. And, you can use part template, part personalized stuff. But ask yourself that question, could a computer do what you were doing? And then also just pray to be aware of what your students need and how you can reach them. Several people have alluded to this, but we never know what we do, how it will impact people. And the why, I can't put a why there because that's up to you. It's personal for you. Your motivation for why you are here, it's individual for each of us. And I noticed that find is there twice, so I guess that means it's important. So find your why. And Hilary's going to go through, and she's going to give us an example of how this has, one specific example with one of our instructors who had a great experience. And I will let her come up.
Okay, so the inspiration for this presentation, not the technique, but the touch, comes from a specific instructor, and he did give me his permission to talk about our experiences with him, which were very fascinating. And it was interesting because I approached coaching in one way without realizing it. I thought there was one formula. Of course, if you were to ask me beforehand, do you think there's one formula for online teaching and instruction? I would say, of course not. It's different for everybody. But I was realizing, especially through him, that I was kind of approaching it with one way of, well, what's success? Success for me, I like visuals. I would make visuals. Students on student feedback would say, she cares because she makes visuals. So for me, the key was everybody should make visuals. Well, it was interesting because I had this person who struggled in areas that I didn't quite know how to help. His strengths, though, and looking at his strengths, it was interesting. Quick response. He was very active on discussion boards, weekly class Adobe meetings to help out the students with stuff. And so you can see he was a very responsive instructor. His weakness was literally technology. And that was a huge weakness. And it seemed to be a domino effect for other areas. So despite the fact that he was very responsive, it didn't come across that he cared much. This is a nice guy, but their experience wasn't very good. They lumped it in with, we're not really learning anything. So in that situation, if you had this, I want to present this question to you. If you were coaching this person, you see that these were his strengths and those were his weaknesses, and there's not a right or wrong, what would you do? What would you say, okay, how can I help him? Show that he cares. Yes. Okay. 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 So you'll give him training resources, tutorials. Yes. Go ahead, Cameron. Yeah, so get in Adobe, share screen. Yes. Thank you. Yes, yes, and then, yeah, go ahead. Back here, yeah.
I was just going to say, I would try to, if you really struggle with technology, I would try to focus on maybe one or two things that you could learn how to do that would really express that care and not worry about too many things. So you could just really focus and learn those one or two technology that would really help.
Lynn, take her name down. She needs to be your next coach.
Okay.
No, that's very good. Thank you. You just concentrate on two things. All right, I saw some other hands, Sarah, and then, yeah.
Well, I think that I would kind of express to him the fact that the students are putting in a set amount of time, concentrating a set amount of time so that they can master the content and have a successful learning experience. And that as an instructor, it's his duty to do the same thing. So if he wants his students to have a successful experience and to put forth the effort, he too needs to put forth the effort to learn his content, to learn the system, to learn everything. It's like a mirroring effect.
Okay,
Do that on mirror.
thank you. Thank you. Right here and then back there, yeah.
In my experience, most people who don't master technology are intimidated by it. So I think I delved into how you can overcome that intimidation. Because once they've overcome that, we've got tons of training resources on anything
Yeah.
and everything. But until they're willing to let go of that hesitance to embrace it, it's not really going to change.
Okay, thank you. Back here and then over here, yeah.
I'm just curious, like, what you mean by his weakness as technology, because I feel like to be active on a discussion board and to hold weekly class building meetings, he couldn't have been too terrible with technology. And so I wonder if you could just help him find his strengths, and show him how he can focus on those in the classroom rather than making him feel like you gotta learn all this stuff if you're gonna be a good teacher. He probably already does know some stuff that he can use to be a teacher. I think Adobe classrooms are difficult, and I'm not technological.
Oh, no, and that's good. I should qualify that. He got on, but that's the amount that he could turn on his microphone and then talk, but there was nothing more to Adobe Connect than that. That was also part of the class, and that class was a really good class, but part of the class was trying to have this open classroom for them to be able to come in. So even if they came in and asked a question, he actually could not be able to show them or answer it. He could verbally answer. Yeah. So that's a good point. And so I thank you for allowing me to qualify that. So actually, I do want to hear, I wish I had more time. I did say over here, and this will be our last one because we don't have that much longer. So go ahead.
We were collaborating, and first we would seek to understand.
Okay.
Ask him questions instead of just giving him information or resources, but to seek what, help us understand why technology is your weak, it happens to be your weakness, and what is your understanding of it, and then we would know how to better provide him with the resources.
That's good. Thank you. I really appreciate your feedback on that because as I tried to figure out, my solution was similar to what some of you had kind of talked about. It was to try to help improve his technological skills, and it was targeted to just trying to do a couple of things. And that first semester of doing that, it did not work. And I would get on Adobe Connect and share computers and try to have him walk through the steps and do things, take screenshots, email it later so that he could try to see it that way. And in fact, just to kind of give you an idea, as we're sharing computers and trying to have him either download a video or take a picture from a website like Google or whatever, it was that he could not figure out how to open another internet web browser tab. And so in trying to show him that, it took 20 minutes and we never resolved it. And so in looking at that, I was a little deflated. How can I help this person? Is it even possible that he can be an instructor his students need without having these technological, like it wasn't even being savvy, just knowing some know-how with some of this? How can I help him? He was willing. But some of that there is just like, is this even possible? So fortunately, I had a second crack at it, a second semester to try to figure this out. So in looking at this, I had to kind of rewire, in a sense, my brain to try to figure out how to help this person out. And so in looking at that, try to figure out what is a bridge here. What's a bridge, a different bridge between the strengths and weaknesses? So I decided I'm going to look at the content. He's doing everything right. Response, active on the discussion boards, Adobe Meetings. What's the content of that? I'm going to look at that. And in looking at the content of what he was giving his students, that's when they really started to feel like they weren't getting much from the course. And that's where I decided, you know what, this is something we can really work with. In talking with him, the guy was the most knowledgeable man that I probably have ever met, especially in his expertise. And he knew everything. If you were to talk to him and then look at his classroom, it would not be two of the same things at all. You would not get that. So it's like, how can we get this to translate over of who he is, what's all in his mind, how he knows this, to then having his students feel like they're getting that as well. So in looking at that and looking at the content, that's what we focused on. How can we improve the type of communications you're having despite this technological things? We won't worry about that. He did know how to post a picture on iLearn3, which is good, and at least be able to copy and paste a YouTube embed thing to put it into a discussion board. But that was really kind of like the extent. Okay, so we have that. So what can we do to help? And so what was interesting, so this is lesson 3. This is an example. Lesson 13 before. This looks really great. You're looking at this going, visually, this looks really great. It looks very helpful. And in a sense, yes, it was helpful. It was very checklist oriented. He was giving information. This is what you're going to have. You're going to see this. Upcoming is this. And here's a deadline for this. And that was the extent of it. So we thought, how can we bring in your knowledge, your information to this? And so the very next semester, this was an example of what he did. So he took out some of that information and he brought in this visual because they were about to have an assignment coming up that he knew they had trouble with, past students had trouble with deciphering the way certain handwriting happens, and this is one of his expertise. So he's like, okay, I'm going to give them examples. Here are some examples. You have this assignment coming up. Here's how I want to try to help prepare you for this assignment. And this is one of the simple ways in which he was able to do that, so that they at least knew and understood before his communications were about the functions of iLearn3 and less about the content of the class. And so then he was able to choose to switch that conversation. And so that's like one example of what he did. I want to give you another example of how this also played out, which was interesting. So we looked at his feedback. Here's like someone who gets full credit. And of course we talk about, and you guys talked about, you don't want a formatted email from the office. You want something substantial or something specific type of feedback from the office. Well, of course, with this and his response, it's 100, so one could think you don't need to give one, but still, it's pretty much, one would look at it and go, it's probably formatted response. And so in talking with him, as we talked about that, one of the things that we discussed is if your students could walk away with 2 things from this course, that if someone was to say, oh, you took that class, what did you learn? If they could say 2 things that they learned from that class, what would you have it be? And so he figured out his two things. And then throughout the whole semester, he integrated those things throughout each assignment. And one of his things comes up in his feedback. So this is how he brings that back into the course so that when these students leave the course, they can at least leave with specific ideas of something that they really did learn because he focused it. And so you see, even with 100, that his feedback is just a little bit more, a little bit substantive, even if to some degree some of it's formatted, it doesn't matter. Some of it's just a little bit more specific. What I noticed that was interesting, that I wasn't really anticipating, was that the grades from before, he never really gave very low grades at all. And so a lot of them, this on this one specific assignment was just 90, the lowest was a 96. And this was part of the feedback he gave with the 96. Well, as he thought more about his course, thought what he wanted his students to learn from the course, and thought about being more specific in his feedback, I saw a corresponding difference in how he graded. He actually was a little bit more critical, but as you see, not like terribly. It's not like a bad thing to be critical, but sometimes with this type of feedback and having students not get full credit, they actually are able to learn a whole lot more from mistakes, sometimes more so than obviously a perfect score. And what's interesting in coaching, something that we have noticed as well, is that students actually have favorable reviews to those who seem to be harsher on their grading. One, because they feel like, and of course, harsh, I should qualify that with substantive feedback of why they got what they got, how they can improve for the next time. And so this was something I wasn't really anticipating, but saw as a correlation with him trying to be more specific when it came to his content and how much this had improved. So kind of like in closing here, of a little bit of suggestions on how we can show this, even to somebody who we're in online learning, the biggest deficit was technology. And you think, can you really overcome that? Well, this instructor, one of the reasons why I used him as an example, and it changed the way I approached coaching after that, he was the one out of all the people in coaching who improved the most. And he had the biggest jump and the highest rating of all of our other instructors. So despite the fact that he still had his technological problems, as he still does today, he was able to jump so much. He shared his experience, his expertise, and his students really felt like they were getting a very quality education, despite not the visuals that maybe I would make or something like that. So really, two things to take away for me for this. Share your knowledge, expertise to help students in advance of difficult assignments. You know something's coming up. Hey, here's how I want to help you. And do not hesitate to say, here's how I want to help you because I care about your success. I want you to succeed in this next assignment. So be looking for this. So share your knowledge, expertise, and give specific feedback, at least one positive paired with whatever else you want them to learn. If there are two things in your course that you want your students to take away, what are those two things? And just hammer those ideas throughout the semester. And then they walk away really feeling like they understood. Because a lot of times I teach a course that's not part of their major. So they have to take it. So in essence, they don't really care much about the information. So knowing that's who I have, what two things do I want them to be able to know and to use in their life, or to be able to tell other people that this is something that they learned?
Wait, you stay up here. And then the responsive thing. Just remember, whatever your why is, that's going to drive everything else that you do. I think that the important thing with all of this is just remembering that your students, they really want you to care about them. And they want to get answers quickly. And they want you to be there for them. And it doesn't matter how smart you are or how good you are with different computer programs or doing all these other things. I mean, those are nice and they're fun for us to do. But ultimately, you can have very, very, you don't have to have this huge variety of skills. As long as you care about them, that's the biggest skill that you need. And if you have that, then you're going to be fine. And we see it all the time. People who their students aren't getting a good experience, and once they just show a little bit of interest, they start at least hitting their checklists, but then checklists plus a little bit of caring, they're golden. And Hilary has been a fantastic instructor coach, and I hope that her story and the journey that she just shared with you will help you as you look at how you interact with your students. And we believe in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you for going.